I'd like to read a quote for you. I'd like to read a quote for you from Piers Morgan. This is a sad, shameful, and ridiculous day for America to drag a former president who's running for president again through criminal courts over something so trivial feels like a massive overreach and an incredibly divisive and obviously politically partisan action. Again, that's Piers Morgan. He's a pretty liberal guy, right? And that's where we stand today. Different country today than it was 24 hours ago. We've never been here before. We have entered Banana Republic territory. It's pretty disappointing, actually, to have us in this position. George Landrith is the president of Frontiers of Freedom and an esteemed constitutional law expert, author of a new book, Let Freedom Ring Again. And George, good to have you here.
It's great to be with you.
Well, thank you for taking the time. Look, first of all, your response. These charges, first of all, were unfounded. They were created. They were manufactured, if you will, violation of federal election law, which couldn't be tried in state court, and yet it was anyway. And somehow that was used to turn falsification of business record misdemeanors that expired in 2019, if they were even real then, which they were not, but turned those into felonies. And then you have tax violations that were never discussed during the trial at all. And my gosh, here we are trying to save America. And these people are perverting the entire process. They can't beat him at the ballot box. They want to beat him in the jury box. They don't care what millions of people and how they vote. They just want to make sure they get 12 people to vote the way they want to keep power. What an embarrassing day, George.
Indeed, it really is. The concept, we have a jury system, and the idea is the jury has to be unanimous. And yet the judge instructed them in a way that suggested that unanimity wasn't required. They could all come to different conclusions. An example would be each charge, each element of the crime must be agreed upon unanimously by the jury. And the judge told them explicitly, well, you don't all have to agree on exactly what crimes he committed as long as you agree he committed some crime.
Yeah,
and
as long as he did something.
That's crazy as all get out.
Right, and then you drag out a porn star, has nothing to do with the case. Yeah. His lawyer, former lawyer, who's been imprisoned for being a liar, who lied on the stand, who lied during testimony in this case, which basically still has nothing to do with the case. When the Trump team says, well, we want to bring in somebody from the Federal Elections Commission. No, you can't do that. Can't have them testify. You can't have them. You can't put on a vigorous defense if you're not allowed to put on a defense at all. Right?
Right. No, exactly. This is sometimes judges will make errors that are reversible, but they're what you'd call good faith errors, meaning they weren't clearly designed just to get the defendant. They just make a human error. It's kind of like if you hire a plumber. Sometimes they may not fix the leak the first time. But this is not that case. This is a case where if he were a plumber, he came into the house and then began sabotaging your pipes, creating new leaks and destroying the house. And this judge needs to be removed from office. And then I would argue they should probably use the civil rights legislation that made it a crime to use state power to violate the constitutional rights of individuals.
Let me ask you about reversible error here, George. It's important. Reversible error, when it appears to be intentional, which it is, when you don't allow them to defend themselves, you put in a gag order that is basically unconstitutional in and of itself. You allow the jury and the prosecution to say whatever it wants, the jury gets to hear it. This is reversible error. How fast can that be reversed? Because the problem is we're in election season, 176 days until the election. These court proceedings are a process. They just want to grind it slow. Now they can call him a convicted felon in the hopes that they can move the polls by a point or two, and maybe they can. I think they're going to get a boomerang effect and see Americans solidify around Donald Trump because of a sense of completely unfair play. But how long would this process take? Well,
normally, you're right. The process of justice grinds slowly sometimes, and so if in a normal situation, it wouldn't surprise me if this would take up to a couple of years to work its way through the courts. Certainly a year, but not 180 days or less. It's possible it could, because a court could, for example, determine that this case demands that it be dealt with more swiftly, and so therefore it could. But that wouldn't be the typical result. Of course, this isn't the typical case. This is the very first time ever in our nation's history where a state prosecutors decided to trump up crazy charges and go after a former president.
Well,
So,
when I look at Bush v. Gore, when the state of Florida and its high court was trying to play games with election law and so forth, and the Supreme Court stepped in and says, you can't do that. And I think the Supreme Court has an equal footing here to do the same thing and say, wait a second, New York, you can't just, trump things up and have special rules and not allow somebody to defend themselves. I think Bush v. Gore applies here in this case for the Supreme Court. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right, and that's the example of where someone says, could this be overturned before the election? The answer is yes, it could, but it would require a court at some level above where we are today to essentially intervene and go, whoa, this is crazy, this is dangerous, this is going to violate the law in crazy ways, we've got to do something about it. And that's it, you're exactly right. In Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, wait a minute, the Florida Supreme Court is every other day changing the written law that Florida has, that was passed by a legislature that had a very exact process for how you handled close elections and recounts, and they're just essentially replacing their judgment for the legislature and whatever the governor at the time was who signed the law into effect. Right. And the court said, yeah, you can't do that. We actually have a law, we're a nation of laws, and the court doesn't just get to kind of ad hoc change everything. And they were right.
Yeah, they were right, and hopefully we can get this turned around, because if not, this country is on the fast track to oblivion. George, tell the folks where they can find your website and learn more about the work that you do.
Sure. Well, Frontiers of Freedom, our website's very easy. It's ff.org. And of course, if they want to get my book, which talks not about this case explicitly, but talks about the principles that are involved. It talks about the rule of law, the Constitution, the decline of the country. Let Freedom Ring, again, can be found at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and at posthillpress.com.
Go find it. Go find it. ff.org. George Landrith, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. I'll be right back.